again. It's Baggy Hi-Fi time. Greetings, cats and kittens. Welcome once again to Baggy Hi-Fi, my channel devoted to record collecting and part of the vinyl community in the UK. Welcome to everyone who's tuning in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for viewing. It's been quite a week here in the UK as the coronavirus news intensifies and develops. Let's see what happens next week. It's as we await further news. So I hope you're all keeping well out there. My last video but one was devoted to records that I recently purchased, record vinyl finds, and I grouped those last lot together under the categories or genres of psych and garage. Now this next one is part two of recent vinyl finds. I thought that I would put them again under categories just to manage them, because there are a lot to talk about. And this video will include recent records bought which are kind of fit into the categories of electronica, jazz and prog. Now I don't really buy many records in the electronica genre really, despite my taste being fairly eclectic, but there are certain labels and bands that I do really like, and one of them is Broadcast. I guess they do fit into the electronica tag. Other influences are sort of soundtrack music, dream pop, sort of indie dream pop. Trish Keenan was their vocalist, and she died sadly back in 2011. This is the first album by Broadcast, and it's called The Noise Made by People, released on Warp Records, and this is a vinyl reissue which I just recently bought. Not too long ago, Psych in the Valleys was talked about these Broadcast reissues, and that did influence me in tracking these down. I'd like to get them all really. I don't think this is probably the best Broadcast album, but it does sort of set out their sound, which they would develop in the future over the next few albums. Their first issue was Work and Non-Work, but that was just a collection of singles which they put out before this first album. So yeah, certainly recommended. Probably many of you already know this album, but if you don't, I would recommend it. Now that artwork on this album was designed by Julian House, and he has a connection with this next record I'm going to show, because Julian House, a graphic designer, went on to form the Ghostbox label, a group of mainly electronic artists launched in 2004. Julian House is a member, or is probably the main man behind the Advisory Circle, and also a group called the Focus Group. I would recommend really anything on the Ghostbox label. They're very consistent releases, and they all have this great artwork. So what do they sound like? I think try to imagine if Kraftwerk grew up in the home counties of England and were brought up on a diet of strange children's programs from the 70s and 80s. That influence is certainly in there, and this is a really very strong release from Out Here by the Advisory Circle on Ghostbox Records. and so on to jazz. Recent purchases in jazz records. I think I've noticed a few people on the VC, the vinyl community on YouTube, saying that they're very cautious about dipping into jazz because it's such a massive area of music. You know, do you listen to fusion? Do you listen to bebop? Do you listen to Dixieland? Do you listen to hard bop? Do you listen to free jazz? Do you listen to avant-garde? It's just a massive area. But I think it's worth pursuing, because if you kind of just ignore that whole area of jazz, you're going to miss out on some music which I think, you know, you're bound to like one category or one particular style of jazz. So it's worth having a look at. I'm no expert myself, but certainly have enjoyed, you know, over the last few months dipping a little bit further into jazz. So where do you start? There is a fair amount of elitism, I think, surrounding jazz music, and you know, that's not a good thing. So I do recommend maybe that you start with CDs, because CDs are so cheap at the moment. Bit prohibitive to buy, you know, an original Blue Note jazz record if you're just kind of starting out, and some of the reissues are quite expensive. So I mean, I've managed to get lots of CDs of classics like you know, Miles Davis, In a Silent Way, John Coltrane, for about £3 on eBay. Great classics like Eric Dolphy's Out to Lunch. So this is a great way of finding out more about what you might like in jazz, and then maybe you can, you know, go on and start buying the vinyl. Also, I think a lot of sort of late 60s and early 70s jazz will appeal to rock fans. Remember that Miles Davis, you know, started going into electric music in the late 60s with albums like this, Bitches Brew, absolute classic. This made a lot of die-hard jazz fans in the direction he went, but Miles Davis was a pioneer. And in Miles Davis's band, around about this time of Bitches Brew, was John McLaughlin. And I think many of you will be familiar with John McLaughlin through his 70s band, the Mahavishnu Orchestra, a fusion band, very much showing off kind of music, very each member of the band, you know, fantastic musician, and you know, playing at breakneck speed. I'm not that keen myself on the Mahavishnu Orchestra, but I do like John McLaughlin's guitar playing. He's an English guitarist still with us. He's playing with Miles Davis. So he made some solo albums in the early 70s which are really exceptional. The first one I only have on CD, and that's Extrapolation. And on this he plays with some British jazz musicians, including John Sermon and Tony Oxley. This is kind of more traditional jazz of that time, of the late 60s. His playing doesn't have many effects on it. It's quite clean sounding, but an excellent first solo album by John McLaughlin. And then I bought this beauty here, Devotion, which is his second solo album from 1970. And this really is a doozy, this one. The band on here are different from the band on Extrapolation. So John McLaughlin on guitar, Buddy Miles, drums and percussion, who I believe played with Jimi Hendrix, Larry Young on organ and electric piano, and Billy Rich on bass. And this one is a killer. It's quite different from Extrapolation. The guitar is distorted. The keyboards are very distorted as well. It's less kind of precise compared to Mahavishnu Orchestra, more kind of almost flailing at times. There's a lot of real rock feel on this album, and beautiful sleeve design and photography by Ira Cohen. Rather psychedelic images there, but beautiful album. I managed to get this on eBay for about £5, I think it was. That was a real find, and I do very much recommend this one. Now, you've probably seen me show, if you watch some of my other videos, show records by Sun Ra. Now, Sun Ra has a massive discography, probably the largest in music history, never mind jazz history. He was a keyboardist, band leader and composer. Very colourful character, claimed he was from Saturn, and his music is extremely cosmic. And again, I think a lot of his music, even though he recorded in lots of different styles, including doo-wop, big band sound, and then very avant-garde stuff later on. I think you'll probably find something in his discography that you'll like, and he's a bit of a genius really, and again I think he would appeal to rock fans. So this is the latest album I bought by Sun Ra in one of his incarnations of the, on this one it's Sun Ra with his Myth Science Orchestra. Sun Ra plays electronic piano on this one, and his great sidesmen John Gilmore and Marshall Allen are on here on tenor sax and flute. This one was recorded when was this recorded? I think this is mid-60s. The Nubians of Plutonia, typical cosmic title of Sun Ra. Quite an accessible one, this one. Good one to maybe start, this mid-60s stuff. Originally released on the El Saturn label. You'll never find copies of his records on El Saturn. These reissues will have to do, because some of them were only released in editions of about 75. And one of my memories of when I lived in Liverpool in the 80s, and my friend Ed Pinson reminded me of this, was that shop in Liverpool, Prog Records, actually did used to sell some copies of his El Saturn releases with handmade covers. Why didn't we buy them at the time? Well, we probably didn't really know who Sun Ra was. So, you know, we have to be happy with these reissues, and I do really recommend Sun Ra. I think you'll find him very interesting. Have a try. And at the beginning of this video, the prologue of this video, I showed myself reading this comic book about Sun Ra meeting Windy Wilberforce, character invented by Ed Pinsent, an English cartoonist. And this one, I do recommend this one to accompany your listening of Sun Ra records. It's available via Lulu Press. You can buy that online. So that's Windy Wilberforce meets Sun Ra, and there he is, the great man himself. And finally, I mentioned a few classics like Miles Davis and John Coltrane, to buy those on CD. Now, you can buy quite a lot of John Coltrane albums on album reissue fairly cheaply, but I was very pleased to get a copy of one of his most well-known works from the 60s, A Love Supreme, and this one is an original 1965 UK pressing of his album A Love Supreme, and I have my friend Tom Clark to thank for this, for actually giving me this copy, which I'll treasure. Tom Clark is a real jazz buff, knows a lot about jazz and has a massive jazz collection. Be good if he could make his own videos, but maybe he won't, I don't know. But thank you, Tom, for this wonderful vinyl copy of A Love Supreme. Finally, on to Prog. These recent purchases I made of Prog records. First one, Pete Sinfield, Still, released in 1973 on the Manticore label run by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Pete Sinfield is only made one solo album, but he was associated with King Crimson in their very early manifestation. Lyric writer, writer of very flowery, very much prog rock lyrics. And although I've liked King Crimson for years and years, I'd never heard this solo album by Pete Sinfield until a few weeks ago when I managed to buy a copy of it for about £7.50. Well, £7.50 exactly, actually. Gatefold sleeve, of course. Wouldn't be a prog album without a gatefold sleeve with all those lyrics. Give you a sample of Pete's lyrics. The sea goat casts Aquarian runes through beads of mirrored tears. Suave pirates, words of apricot crawl out of your veneer. Meaningful stuff. But anyway, you have to suspend disbelief, I think, really, with this record. It's not as wimpy as I expected it to be. It rocks in places, and there's some great guests on here. It is a really good album, actually. Greg Lake is on here, John Wetton is on here, some of the horn players, Mel Collins, associated with King Crimson. Bit of a multi-starred cast on this, so yeah, I think this is a good one. From 1973, Still by Pete Sinfield. And Greenslade, well known to prog fans. I think this is the third album, I'm not sure, maybe third or fourth album from 1975. Time and Tide. Again, even though I've listened to prog since I was a teenager, I was aware of Greenslade, but really only started listening to them recently. And Dave Greenslade, formerly of Colosseum, I believe, is the main keyboard player in this band. Predominantly instrumental, but some songs on here. And sleeve designed by Patrick Woodruff, contemporary of Roger Dean. There we are. Yeah, another good one. Perhaps not their best, but I was very pleased to find this one for about, well, for £11. Now this one's a little bit more obscure. Band called Druid, recorded on EMI. They won a talent contest run by Melody Maker music paper, and they made 2 albums. This is their second one, Fluid Druid, released in 1976. There they are, there's the band there. Music is firmly in the Genesis Yes style, but if you've worn out all your Genesis and Yes albums, then if you don't already have this one, recommend this one, and also their first album. So there you are, Druid with their album Fluid Druid. And that's all for this video. I'm going to be making a third recent vinyl finds video very soon, which will cover more sort of pop categories and rock music, some folk as well. So hope to see you in that video. Hope you join me with that one. Thanks for my new subscribers. I now have 21 subscribers. Thanks to those who are in the vinyl community who've been in touch. It's great to build up this friendship with other record collectors. So until next time, take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye now.